What messaging would you give to Christian nationalists if you could talk to them all in one room?
If the government is a government and God is God, let's not conflate the two.
Yeah, there's a lot I could start on with that, like Pentagon church service, like
separation
Pulp
of church and state,
Fiction.
what?
I think that people should be very skeptical of mass churches or mass like orgs that are wanting you to believe in like this one thing. I think that we need to start a tally for how many times we say, "Where's Marco Rubio?" And he could be like,
"Where's
washed
Waldo?"
Ups, I was about
Where's
to say
Marco?
washed ups, where's Waldo?
Hello everyone, welcome to Washed Up. I'm Colin, this is Abby. We're here in Washington, D.C. to comment on the weekly news, so you don't have to listen to the legacy media that your grandparents do. This is episode 47, and it is currently April 20th.
Let us get back into it. We are talking about our favorite guy, Trump, and
President number 47, the same as this episode. He seems to really have a fondness for 47 and even has cited it many times when talking about Iran, because apparently it was 47 years ago when they installed their current regime. So he really likes to mention that and bring it up in relationship to his own presidency as 47.
Right, and Trump, there's just been so much that's been going on there. As many Washed Up viewers know, we are both Catholics, and we even reported on Pope Leo when he first started around a year ago, but there's been a little bit of discourse between Trump and the Pope recently. Started out when the Pope called Trump out for the comments he made about the annihilating an entire civilization and talking about how these threats against the entire people of Iran is truly unacceptable. He said to reporters, "There are certainly issues here of international law, but even more than that, it is a moral question for the good of the people." And after that, on Truth Social, Trump called the Pope weak on crime.
Was that weak on crime comment in response to that particular quote, or just in general?
Yeah, it was he said it after that happened, timeline-wise. He said that Pope Leo is weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy, that Leo should get his act together as Pope, use common sense, stop catering to the radical left, and focus on being a great Pope and not a politician.
See, it's funny because, like Abby said, we're both Catholic, raised Catholic, but we're not immune or avoidant of criticizing the church also. I think if you guys go back to our videos, when Pope Francis died, I made a video right after the fact, and I was pretty critical of him, and I think I even used the word feckless a couple of times. Unfortunately, when I think of Pope Francis, that's a word that comes to mind for me, is feckless. I'm not opposed to criticizing the church. I think as any institution, it should be criticized. And in the role of a journalist, like, you're supposed to call out when people in positions of power aren't perhaps upholding their own ideals or, doing stuff in the best interest of the public. But I do think it's pretty outlandish to be saying that he's bad on crime. I'm not even sure how that's connected to, what's going on in Iran and potentially Leo being critical about that.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think either of us are immune to commenting on Catholic leadership or even the institution itself. It's the same that I feel about the government, and that we can comment on things and still be American, still be Catholic, still be a part of these shared communities. I do think it is strange the way that Trump is talking about this. I think he said something, the choosing of the words weak on crime feels like he's looking for this viral moment, like Trump is always doing. And I think he knew that it would kind of bring a lot of attention to him in that way.
It actually makes perfect sense, and it kind of is right in the playbook of, any partisan politician. For instance, even with this whole Iran war, if you're opposed to the war, then the right, and especially MAGA and Trump and his followers, try to say that you're pro the Iranian regime. So every time that we talk about the war as people who are pretty opposed to what's going on under Operation Epic Fury, we have to qualify every single time, we don't support the Iranian regime, we don't support the Iranian regime, and it gets very tedious and tiresome. But if we don't do that, then it'll be, we'll be construed as somehow being anti-American or anti-military or pro-Iranian regime. So we have to be very deliberate about the way that we say it, because politicians will try to paint the narrative in their own best interest.
Yeah, and a lot of people were, I think, using this as a line of deciding that Trump has crossed it. I've seen a lot of people posting about...
Now?
I know, right? We were kind of talking off camera a little bit about how this is the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, they're like, the people who were loyal to Trump before this...
It's a strong camel.
The people who are loyal to Trump before this, but are also, like, very Catholic or very conservative or whatever, have decided to finally stop supporting him. There are definitely still Trump supporters in that way, but it is interesting to see that people are starting to flip on him who have been sticking by him this entire time and not willing to admit when they're wrong.
Yeah, I've been following public opinion polls pretty close ever since, well, the last couple of years, but especially since the Iran war started, because I'm really interested in how the war is potentially going to change Trump's trajectory as president. And he has lost a lot of support, especially among independents and even Trump loyalists. It's funny, CNN said that 100% of MAGA supported the operation in Iran, but then that doesn't really answer the question of how many people no longer identify as MAGA as a result of what's happened in Iran, and I would venture a guess it's a substantial amount. And so, yeah, I think the way that public opinion is shifting, it's not surprising to me that he's losing large groups of people who used to previously identify as very Republican, including Catholics who typically tend to vote right.
Yeah, the Pope also responded to Trump's responses from there, talking about actually saying the Trump administration in his response, which I also think is interesting. I have loved listening to people talk about the nuance of like the Pope being American and being involved in this. I remember when he was first announced as an American Pope, the first ever American Pope, people were kind of initially concerned with that, being like, is he going to be involved in politics? This response to Trump calling him weak on crime, he had said that he has no fear of the Trump administration or speaking out loudly of the message of the gospel, which is what I believe I'm here to do. I do not look at my role as being political or politician, and that he doesn't want to get into a debate with him.
Totally, and I think that he hasn't been being political if he's calling out war. I think certainly past popes like Francis, we were also kind of critical of because they were political and they're talking about like issues like climate regulation and stuff like that I'm like, I don't really see how there's a direct religious tie-in to that. I mean, you could make the argument, certainly there's a tie-in, but with war, it's so obvious how there's a tie-in because the church being so pro-life and war being so anti-life, it's like if the Pope didn't speak about the war, then that would be way more of an issue to me.
Yeah, I remember I went to Catholic school my whole life, and I remember growing up, and in our classes we'd talk about things like war or death or sometimes life in general. And if there's one thing that the Catholic Church will stay consistent on, is that they are most definitely pro-life. I think that sometimes conservatives in America get that confused with other things. Like, they're pretty consistent on, like, the fact of abortion, war,
the death penalty.
Like, that's some consistency versus, like, in certain conservatives, they decide to pick and choose what they're pro-life about.
Right. I definitely admire that about the church, too, and that they're so consistent about it. I think, as a rule, on Washed Up, we prefer when people in power are principled and not political in their beliefs. And like you said, picking and choosing, that's a perfect way to put it, because you'll meet conservatives who are anti-abortion but pro-death penalty. And if you can't be consistent on, like, first principles and see the through line there of, well, the principle there is to be pro-life, then you almost have no leg to stand on. And I don't really find those people to be very credible. Again, here on Washed Up, I think we try to take a similar approach of finding what the underlying explanation or rationale for a certain policy decision might be, and then trying to be very consistent across all issues on that.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about being consistent in our beliefs and trying to talk about it on Washed Up, and even if we do decide to change things, or if we have like a new argument come up, we bring that up as well, like admitting when we're wrong. Yeah, we've talked about like all these issues before as well, mostly in the side of life and less coming to bodily autonomy, I think, and that's where my abortion views lie. But yeah, going back to the Pope and Trump, I feel like the thing that most people were talking about was Trump's AI image of Jesus, of himself
Right.
as Jesus that was posted. We kind of alluded to it a little bit in our last episode. We put it in our thumbnail, but we didn't actually talk about it because it happened, I think, the day that we posted it, or definitely
Yeah.
after we recorded.
Yeah, it was right after we recorded, I think, and totally everyone was extremely upset about it, saying it was just continuing what Trump had been doing the week before of kind of making a mockery of Christians and Catholics on their Holy Week with Easter, early this month. And it was interesting to see who was rushing to defend his action versus who was making that their line in the sand. And I do think that was kind of telling, because afterward Trump said, "Oh, I thought it was a picture of me as a doctor, not as Jesus." And
I've been seeing the funniest memes of like images of Jesus, and it's like me when I go to the hospital and I see my doctor or whatever.
I saw one of Jesus walking on water, and someone said, "This is a picture of my doctor water skiing."
That's so good.
Yeah, it was definitely the talk of the town here in DC too. I mean, it's funny because I know several people in the policy world, and some of them are Catholic, and it's always fascinating to me to see how they kind of walk that line, because you'll find yourself in like ethical situations if you're even anywhere remotely adjacent to policy where you are having to make these ethical decisions, and to not allow your personal beliefs to creep in any way is near impossible. We've talked about like Amy Coney Barrett before, who's a very vocal, outspoken Catholic, but then also in this role as a judge where she's having to arbitrate things and be extremely objective based on the Constitution as her, framework there. And I just find those people so fascinating. How do they navigate those tough political situations?
Yeah, totally. And people, I think, are also making a stance about that aloud as voters and as people who are changing the tides. I mean, like we were kind of making fun of it, of people drawing the line right here. It's interesting how many young people are speaking out about this too. We were talking about actually the rise in Catholicism in young people. I saw a New York Times article earlier today, actually, or it wasn't released earlier today, but I re-looked it up earlier today, and it was saying that there has been like a huge uptick in newly baptized Catholics, and the age range that they're seeing it in is 18 to 35-year-olds, and then the article was comparing it to the fact that Gen Z, or like young people, are super lonely, and when they are aligned with something like the Catholic Church, like it's really easy, or like joining the Catholic Church, it's really easy to find other young people there for like this sense of community rather than maybe just like finding God. And I thought that was really interesting.
I think it's interesting too as a trend, but I have a slight bone to pick because I feel like I see a think piece drop every couple of months in those legacy outlets of like the New York Times or the Washington Post. Just did a same exact story of like the young people are going back to church, and it's like it's the same story every single time. It makes me question like, okay, well, they can't be going back to church over and over and over again, and that's always a new story. Like,
I was like, I definitely know people who aren't going to church as young people.
didn't we write about that at our student paper about like the rate of Christian identifying as a Christian among Gen Z and like religiosity? Because there was more.
Yeah, there was somebody who wrote about that.
It was
I
like
remember that.
for the first time a couple of years back, there was more people identifying as non-religious than some religion, and so there was a story that we wrote about that.
Yeah, it's...
But maybe the trend now is going back and reversing, where people are, like you said, returning to faith. If they are, in fact, returning to faith, why do you think they're being driven in that direction? Other than, like you said, maybe the
loneliness and community. I think in general, when you're a young person trying to find meaning in life, it just makes sense that you're returning or joining something that maybe might have like more of a spiritual presence, whether that be Catholicism, Christianity, another branch of Christianity, or a different kind of church. I think when you're young and out of school, you're looking for your purpose in life, especially if you're feeling lonely and maybe don't have people around you to like influence yourself.
I think it could also be, in addition to the community aspect, and looking for something bigger than yourself, which is, I think, very normal at this age
Yeah.
and in our generation. I think it's also perhaps the world seems very chaotic and unstable out there right now, so people like would like for there to be some kind of a center that they can attune themselves to or like orient themselves toward. And I think that Christianity, among other religions, is a good thing to like look up to aspire to kind of like help you hold on to your own center in a way, and like to have that clear moral framework of like these are the prescriptions, and if I follow, it will lead to a good life. You know, people can debate that all day, and they do, but there's an argument to be made there for sure.
Yeah, I think it's cool for
How
people.
have we been dealing with that in our personal lives?
Religion?
Using it as a framework for a good life.
It's interesting because I think my relationship with faith has always been like up and down. But I think I'm at like the time of my life for the first time that I have like a very solid grasp of what I think about like the God that I pray to and like my faith and spirituality, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. And I also think that is also a result of being the age that I am, and when you're like younger and you grow up in the church, you're a little more angsty, I want to say, like all teenagers, and you want to be a little different maybe from a path. You're discovering different things. I think it's interesting when people are baptized into something as an adult, because that's like, 100% they're choosing it for themselves, versus maybe somebody like you or I who have been baptized like as young people who didn't really fully have conscious like thoughts of if they wanted this life or not.
I like that Catholics have like the sacrament of confirmation for that exact reason of like it's kind of you're choosing into it. Mm-hmm. Granted, we were like early high school when
I'm
we
like,
did
you were
that,
like
so
15 during that.
But I do appreciate that as like a sacrament and as a ritual that Catholics have. And I think as far as like our own understanding of faith, we've talked about on Washed Up before how I think we both believe that everyone is worshiping something. Whatever they're giving their attention to, I think you could say is a form of worship. And you're either orienting yourself deliberately towards something that is higher, whether that be like any religion, organized religion, or belief system, or you're kind of aimlessly wandering around, in which case your attention is very diffused and going all over the place. And I think that leads to a very chaotic, disorganized life. To me, it's like it's less about what is the thing that you're holding up as the ideal, but it's more about being very deliberate about defining what that thing is for you, so that you're not just diffusely spreading your attention, worshiping all kinds of lower things.
Going off of that page, when people are like looking for things to worship, I think it's also really easy to fall into a space of, someone say propaganda. I think it's really important to be skeptical when you maybe are in a more vulnerable place, and if a community is reaching out to you but also has a certain messaging surrounding it, like maybe we should question like where this messaging is coming from. Like I think that's why Colin and I both are like, yeah, you should question things like the church and government and these people, because at the end of the day, like everyone is still human, whether that be a bad or good thing.
I think that politicians recently have been really cloaking themselves in religious language and in imagery in a way of sort of carrying that like ideal sense about them, when really they're just people too, and we have to remember that they're fallible and not hold them up to that esteem, because there is something much higher than just, everyday people, including like Pete Hegseth, who was recently cloaking himself in a Bible quote that apparently he had borrowed from Pulp Fiction, and he was going up in front of a crowd at a Pentagon church service to deliver a very rousing, very like rah-rah-rah Christian speech.
The path of the downed aviator is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men.
Ezekiel 25:17. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men.
Blessed is he who, in the name of camaraderie and duty, shepherd the lost through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children.
Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness. For he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children.
And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to capture and destroy my brother. And you will know my call sign is Sandy 1.
And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord.
Yeah, there's a lot I could start on with that, like Pentagon church service, like
Separation
Pulp
of church and
Fiction.
state. What?
Yeah, there's a lot that we could get into that about that, but Hegseth definitely looked really not the smartest in that clip. We both watched it before this episode filming, and he's just so silly.
I guess I don't understand what they think they stand to gain from it. I mean, the people who fall for it,
Propaganda, like we were just talking about.
it does, I think, reach like a certain subset of the American population, but certainly not a majority. And I think most people, as we were saying with the Trump posts and him posting himself as Jesus, I think most people find that pretty repulsive and
Right.
offensive and feel ostracized by it to see their elected leaders doing that. So I really obviously fall in the camp of I wish they wouldn't do that. And they only are losing kind of their core base of supporters. It makes you wonder, like, why are they self-destructing in that way of deliberately or inadvertently pushing away their own supporters? That do they not realize that that's the consequence of what they're doing?
Yeah, it also is the same thing with like Vance. He also called out the Pope shortly after the whole thing with Trump AI Jesus was happening. He told the Pope that he shouldn't comment on theology and he should like stick to what he knows, basically, which I also thought was an interesting thing, especially because like I'm not going to judge somebody for how long they've been in a religion, but JD Vance isn't, like, wasn't he just born into
He was converted, yeah,
Christianity,
to Catholicism.
like pretty recently?
As an adult, I think he converted to
Yeah, I think it was like at 35 or something like that. But yeah, just also thought that was pretty interesting, telling a religious leader, the Pope, somebody very well known, that he shouldn't comment on matters of theology.
Right. What other like sort of political figures have you seen who are Catholic who have had to kind of contend with this? Because, like I said, some of them fell away after Trump was posting this stuff. Like I've seen Tucker Carlson, who's not Catholic but Christian, being very critical of the president for posting that. Are there any other like kind of big names besides Vance, Carlson, who have had to enter into this fray?
As in like Republicans?
Yeah, or just religious people in politics too.
Religious people in politics. I've been keeping up, I think, more with like the people's response to it. Have you seen anyone?
No, but
Like,
again, I
there's,
will
like-
I will ask, where's Marco Rubio? I'm pretty sure he's Catholic, but I still have not heard from him on on several important matters recently. So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what he had to say. I do remember after the Olympics in Paris 2024, Rubio was all up in arms about their opening ceremony, which, granted, it was a little over the top, but he was like very kind of playing morality police on it, being like, that was the worst thing ever, and as a Catholic, it's so offensive, and da-da-da-da. Well, where is he now?
I think that we need to sort of tally for how many times we say, "Where's Marco Rubio?" And he could be like,
Where's
washed
Waldo?
Ups, I was about to
Where's
say
Marco?
washed ups. Where's Waldo? Because he seems to be silent or gone every single time we want to talk about him or have a response from him.
He's got his eye on that 2028 candidacy, and people are saying, Vance is going to get it because Rubio has even said if Vance goes for it in 28, like, he won't run against him. That's what he said. But I don't know. Rubio certainly has his name has been mentioned many times for a potential candidate in 2028. So I think it would make sense because he's been playing it very low-key, perhaps a little too low-key.
Way too low-key. I don't know. All those people who all of a sudden disappear because there is candidacy coming up are just so suspicious to me. I'm like, you still have to do your job.
Okay, circling back a little bit to maybe the youth who are returning to church and what their rationale might be for that. How do you see that playing out among our peers in DC? Have you noticed like a lot more people in your orbit have been getting back into religion or
I went to church a couple times at a church near where I live, and I did notice that the first time, okay, by the couple of times I went Ash Wednesday and Easter, which, my bad, sorry. I think I went once for like a normal, like, ordinary ceremony. But when I went, I did notice that there were so many young people there, and that was my number one, like, first thought about it. And maybe it's because, like, when I go to church with my family back in Vegas, it's a very residential mass service, and I'm used to seeing, like, the families that I grew up with, like, the PTO moms, all the people in the community all around that church with, like, their kids and families and stuff like that. And I thought it was so intriguing to see, like, people my age there, or like people if it was, I went to Ash Wednesday on a service right after work, so like around 6 p.m. People were wearing like definitely their work clothes, like I was guilty of that too, and people were carrying their work bags and things like that. So I thought yeah, like I had the thought that there was a lot of young people there before I think even seeing articles about it or seeing people talk about it.
Yeah, I also went to church on Ash Wednesday, and I was actually back in my hometown for that, and similarly, like, saw some of my old classmates there, and classmates' parents and stuff like that, and it was a nice reminder, because I hadn't been planning to go to Mass that day. I think actually maybe you inspired me, because you were telling me that you actually, like, wanted to make it a point to go for Ash Wednesday, and so I kind of, like, wandered into Mass, and then it was nice to see all those people again. And I think that's part of it too, whether you're like a lapsed Catholic or whether you've been consistently going your entire life, or whether you're a convert who is new to the faith. I think it does offer that for people, of like a sense of familiarity and a sense of reconnecting with your past. And you told me before you just find it to be a very nostalgic experience, kind of irrespective of other concerns, but then on top of it, it's also, I don't know, it's like, it does give you something, even if it's hard to put into words exactly what you're getting out of going.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I grew up going to Mass all the time. I used to go 3 times a week, and then once with my family, so 4 times a week, actually. And it does a little bit, something that I like about the Catholic Church, I sometimes dislike it too, but within the rituals of it, is they're very unchanging. Like, you can, if you're growing up on it, like, you can spend so much time outside of not going to church for so long, but the second that I'm, like, back into it, it's muscle memory, like, what I'm saying, what prayers, like, when to kneel, when to stand. Yeah, I find that a little bit comforting.
Yeah, and two, I think the appeal of the church is it's sort of like internationally they try to keep it very consistent also. So like whether you're going on one side of the world or the other, you're getting kind of the same messaging, and that's something that requires like a huge organization like the Vatican to kind of pull off, because they have to have a lot of people involved to like keep that organization alive and going. But it is nice when, like, even on the other side of the world, you go to Mass and it's like still has that sense of familiarity to it. I find that very intriguing.
Yeah, when I was living abroad, I went to Mass at Sagrada in Barcelona, and that was really cool. And it was, like, really historic and beautiful, but it was also just the same as I would in my hometown.
Yeah, so that's very much, I think, the case for Catholics. How about for Protestants? Have you noticed there's been like a resurgence among Protestants, and especially in Gen Z? I have a couple friends here in DC who are Protestant, and recently one of the churches that they attend kind of had a hit piece article written about it, because
Tell us more.
the article was saying that essentially this church was like less of a church and more of like a networking event, and the article, I'm trying to remember what outlet it was from. But they were criticizing this church for essentially just being a bunch of young people who just want to like make connections on the hill and hang out. I feel like Catholics are good at drawing a hard line of saying like we're here for, you know, spiritual purposes and leave the other stuff outside. But I have noticed with some Protestant denominations, it kind of creeps in a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't really know anyone who's like returning to Protestant. Honestly, I don't really know anyone who's returning to or going to Catholic Church either. Like personally, I just was making my observant comments about seeing young people there. So I think that's really unique and interesting about Protestants.
I remember it was Vanity Fair, the article. And this article about this church in DC dropped like right after they did that profile on the entire Trump cabinet. So if you want to find it, same time frame that happened. But yeah, so again, this is not like a diss on this one particular Protestant church in DC, but we do have some thoughts about mega churches and their impact on politics,
and
not just
Christian
here,
nationalism,
but in America at large. So take it away.
Yeah, we actually were talking to a different mutual friend about mega churches for the first time. She like literally didn't even know what it was. I'll insert a photo right here.
Just watch Borat. There's a scene where he goes to a mega church or like a evangelical church.
The Bible says that God was manifest in the flesh and believed on in the world. I got good news. Jesus is God in the flesh.
I was somewhat alluding to this before in terms of propaganda and messaging within the church, but it's a little scary to see kind of this theatrical performance of messaging about maybe war or about MAGA, and it's hidden behind this what's supposed to be holy cause of God.
Yeah, I'm thinking of all of the like stage production that goes into some of these churches, and like I've seen like people on like wires doing like backflips through the air, and I don't know, pyrotechnics, which people are very critical of. Like Turning Point likes to use those in all of their events, but I've also seen it in like mega church settings, and like people just like speaking in tongues and like falling on the floor and like rolling around, and it's hysterical in the literal definition of that word, of hysterical, hysteria, of like just being so over the top that you can't even believe that this is real human behavior.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't like to knock people's religions. Like, I feel like something that we've both talked about is if you, like most of the time, I believe people are all praying to some same higher power, and it's whatever outlet you want to choose to do so. And I don't want to tell you there's a wrong outlet to do so, but I do think that some bells and whistles go off if a huge mega church is talking about how they are pro-war and how they need to stand behind every single decision that's being made by our government and support every single thing that our military is doing right now. Like, I think it's strange in the mixture of like church and state, when churches get political, when outside of religion being inherently political in that way.
It's interesting because there's a very real discourse going on right now among commentators, and especially right-leaning ones who also are Christian. And there's that commentary is like, it's hard when you watch those kinds of things and you see people in the name of Christianity supposedly supporting wars in Iran, and there's a lot of Christians who also live in Iran. Yes, it's predominantly an Islamic country and a theocracy, but there's also Christians who live in Iran. There's also a lot of Christians in southern Lebanon too who are kind of taking the brunt of the attack that's going on in like Beirut and southern Lebanon. So if you ascribe to a worldview of Christianity and you see them as kind of your, I don't know, compatriots in a way of like they worship the same God, they have the same beliefs as I do, it's hard to imagine somehow being able to justify that to yourself watching our military and Israel's military attack those nations and those people. I was seeing a post on X that was going around of, I think it was someone allegedly in the IDF who was like taking down or like desecrating a cross that had fallen or something in Lebanon, and I can add that picture as well, but disturbing things like that. I don't understand how evangelical Christians here in the U.S. can look at that and say, oh, it's okay what's going on in the Middle East because it's all being done in like a holy war, just war type of way.
Yeah, I don't really subscribe to the idea of like just war, holy war, and like the rhetoric behind that. I think that people should be very skeptical of mass churches or mass like orgs that are wanting you to believe in like this one thing, and without it you're going to, I don't know, like not get salvation or something like that. Like I think that's insane.
A couple things from the Bible are coming to mind. First is when Jesus said, like, give to Caesar what Caesar's and give to God was God's. I think that's true. There's kind of an inherent separation between the spiritual and the secular when he lays that out, and I think that maps on well into even today's world of the government is a government, God is God. Let's not conflate the two. Also, even though that's the case, and Christianity is, I think, a very nonviolent religion, I do think that Jesus is not against aggression when that's warranted. For instance, I'm thinking of when he's in the temple and he overturns like the money changing tables and he kind of causes a whole scene. He doesn't attack anybody. He doesn't like physically harm people. But I think aggression can very much be justified and warranted in cases where, you know, you have a very important point to make and that's the only way to get it across. But killing, I have a hard time lumping that in with Christianity. I think it's very explicitly not.
And I think we're both in agreement with that there. What messaging would you give to Christian nationalists if you could talk to them all in one room?
Well, I'm also thinking now of the peace prayer of St. Francis, which is, I just think, a great prayer. Mm-hmm. But there's a line in there in particular about, Lord, it starts off, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Yeah. And I think that's a great, like, humble mentality to take on of how can I show up in the world bringing more peace and not sowing more disruption and chaos and destruction. And it's a beautiful prayer. I would recommend that Protestants read that because I don't think that they're really all about St. Francis in the same way that Catholics are. Another line I love in that is seek first to understand, not to be understood. Another one that I think pertains to war and violence is if you're really seeking to understand someone, you can't treat them in an aggressive manner because you recognize that they have their own viewpoint that is valid and you should be trying to behave diplomatically to bridge that gap, not just beating them over the head with a club.
Right. I think that in the same way that we talk about like media literacy and skepticism, that you can also apply that network of thinking toward religions and like what you subscribe to in terms of your moral beliefs, because like what we were talking about earlier in the episode, at the top of the episode, I think that Catholicism for me is something that has these sort of like set of rules and morals that have molded into something completely different to my personal life now, and that is a foundation of like the way that I was raised. And that doesn't mean that I can't criticize the church and I can't criticize things that are happening that are bad. Like there's no such thing as something that is an institution that is 100% perfect or 100% without fault. And when you realize that and have empathy for your neighbor, I think that we could all be better people together.
I also think that the sacrament of confession in the Catholic Church is another great option for people. I think that there's really something to be said for, I think that each of the sacraments in the church is designed to kind of address a key human behavior, or even like one of the 7 deadly sins can kind of map onto each of the 7 sacraments. And with confession, I've been realizing that it has a lot to do with pride. And people who are very prideful, it's a hard thing to go into a confined setting with a priest and to say out loud all of the, things that have harmed other people that you've done. It takes, I think, it takes humbling yourself, and I think taking your pride and sacrificing it in the name of making better choices moving forward. And that's kind of what you do when you go in and engage in that sacrament. And again, whether or not you're doing it in a religious context or whether or not you're doing it as a secular person who's just self-reflecting about a way to be a better person and to make better decisions, I think it's a great thing that everyone should do.
Yeah, I was talking about confession with somebody the other day who isn't as into the Catholic Church, and they're asking me, like, what does one get out of confession? Like, what is the purpose that you'd be going there besides just, I guess, feeling guilty by this, like, Catholic guilt, or if confession is just some mechanism to, like, keep you into place. And I gave them the response of, like, oh, this is what the church has to say, but for me or for some of my peers, I think you get out of it, like, this feeling of being heard or being, I guess, like, spiritually cleansed. The Catholic Church definitely has, like, different teachings or, like, beliefs on, like, how often you should go to confession, or, like, going to confession, like, clearing you of all your sins, and then you could, like, die and go to heaven and things like that. Like, I'm not sure necessarily what I believe there, but yeah, I think it's a cool ritual that the Catholic Church has.
I think, like, it's similar to, like, talk therapy. It's kind of designed around this premise of if you say out loud the things that you've done, it kind of realigns you with reality in a way. Of, like, there's no denying, there's no running, there's no, I don't know, like, spinning. And so the idea of confession is so opposite of everything that happens in, like, the political world, where everyone is kind of constantly, like, spinning to try to create a narrative and an image that gets them elected, and they'll kind of do whatever. And notoriously DC has all this, like, shadowy stuff going on with very shadowy people. So the idea of going in and owning your faults and again, like, sacrificing your own pride, speaking it out loud to put yourself back in alignment with the truth, I think is something that all of our politicians should try.
Truly. And getting better references. All Bible quotes and stories referenced and prayers in this episode by us are real and not from Pulp Fiction.
Oh, and what I just said is especially true with what's going on in the House right now. I'm sure people have seen Eric Swalwell left Congress, as did Rep. Gonzales of Texas, both over their own allegations and scandals involving. Let's just leave it at that. You guys can do your research if you want.
Always so much to say at the end of the episode. We love bearing the lead.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're done for this episode.
Yep.
Washed up, out.
And amen.